monster is my new shop fan air filter extension cord pencil holder glue and solvent shelf thing. If you want to see how I made it, stick around. If you don't, it's good I didn't want to show you anyway. This is my original shop fan air filter. I built this quite a few years ago. It works well. I used a cheap box fan for the internal parts, and then I just pulled them out of their case and put them into this frame that I built. It does take up a lot of floor space at the foot of my bench. And the other thing that bothers me about this one, or that I wanted to improve upon, was the fact that when I switch from fan to filter, I have to unplug it, flip it around, and plug it back in again. And that was just to avoid having this huge long cord hanging in the way. There's definitely some things I think that we're going to improve upon with the new version. Now, I made this cardboard mock-up just so that I could visualize it and make sure I was going to be happy with how much space it took up. I still obsessed about it for way too long. Okay, so this is cheap big box store plywood, and it's absolutely warped, but it was cheap. It's what I could get, and it wasn't cheap, but it's what I got. And I did undersize all the rough cuts, planning to put some 1/4-inch pine edge banding on here. And this edge banding, I just threw some Titebond 3 on, threw some tape around it to hold it in place until the glue set. I try to avoid nailing this edge banding on, especially with this cheap plywood, because I feel like it splits way too easy. Now, areas like these holes where the cord is going to pass through are really hard to edge band, obviously, so I pretty much just sand them up as well as I can and then hit them with some wood putty or spackle. Just trying to fill in the end voids so that you can't see them through the paint. And then I'm just cleaning up the edges with an 1/8-inch round over bit. This jig for cleaning up edge banding works really well. And knocking it into final size with the DA sander. Now, anywhere I joined plywood like this, I pretty much just glued it and then pin nailed it. I try to avoid screws in these just because this cheap plywood doesn't take screws very well. I found that I have better luck if there's an area that needs a little extra support, I just throw a dowel in there. And because this plywood is a little warped, I have these center brace pieces in there just to hold it in place until I get my face frame on. And then once the face frame is all glued and nailed in place, it'll hold itself. Now, I ran most of my pieces long, and I'll just hit them with the saw here. I feel like it's faster than trying to get everything perfectly to size. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a good way to run the electrical in here. And I ended up deciding to space apart the frame like this with these spacers in there and then running the electrical through that way. I didn't want to have any exposed electrical, so I decided to go with conduit inside there. Flexible conduit or even just straight Romex would have been a lot easier, but These mounting brackets are going to be for mounting the Lazy Susan hardware that is going to allow that centerpiece to operate. And it can be a real pain in the butt to mount those, so that's why I'm creating this bracket with the T-nuts here. That way I'll be able to through bolt it from inside the case. This was kind of the exciting part, to see if my centerpiece was going to rotate nice. Lazy Susan hardware really isn't meant to be used vertically, but I think it's going to be fine. These are going to be all the cutouts for the electrical boxes. So like I said, I decided to use conduit in here. I had a decent amount of conduit on hand, and I kind of like the challenge of bending this stuff. But like I said, if you were to use flexible conduit or Romex, it would be a whole lot easier. I wasn't going for easy, I guess. So this sweep is going to be on the top, and that's going to allow me to feed my cord down in here. And then you'll see that these large 4x4 boxes, they're pretty much just going to be junction boxes and a way to pass the wire through easier. The other thing that it is going to do is allow me to have a spot later that I can mount things like accessories, lights, magnets, anything like that. They'll just have blank cover plates on there, and those blank cover plates will be a nice mounting spot for future accessories. Now, one thing I would change if I did this thing again is these center outlets that are actually going to be on the bottom of the fan in the end. I wish I would have used a deeper box, because I had a really hard time getting the timer switch and the plug in the bottom by the time I had passed other wires through that. And if I would have used like a 2-inch deep box instead of these 1.5-inch boxes, it would have been a lot easier. You may notice in the end of the video, that I ended up making a little cover plate that sits on this top switch here. That's going to be the timer switch. And I needed to do something just to get a little more space in that box. And it worked fine. Now I cut these center pieces oversized, this top angled piece and the bottom piece for the outlet. I was a little worried about trying to get the size perfect, so I ended up running them just a little bit oversized, gluing and nailing them into place, and then I came back later and trimmed them down with a flush cut router bit. Now, originally I had planned on installing this on my ceiling with a double dovetail setup, but it just didn't really work out for me. So I decided to change over to go to Unistrut. And here I'm making some plates to make carriages to ride inside that unistrut. And I just used some 1/8" plate steel I had laying around. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make the carriages with some roll pins and some bearings. This area here is going to be my pivot point for the entire fan. And I decided against using any hardware on this. I didn't want it to rotate too easy. So I'm basically just putting it together with some plywood. I'm going to wax it up and it will just be plywood on plywood. These are the carriages that are going to mount it to the ceiling inside the unistrut. These are super pricey if you buy them pre-built. I priced them out and they were like $120 for the 4 that I needed. So I made these for like a couple bucks each. And this is just a test fit to make sure I'm going to like how it's going to work in the end. Yeah, this slide's nice. All right, so here I am doing the final assembly for the mount to the ceiling. And I'm just waxing this up with some turtle wax. Clean it off a little bit. And that's hopefully just going to allow it to slide easily enough that, you know, I don't want it to have to be cranking it to get it to move, but I don't want it to be moving on its own either. This thing slides so nice, it's crazy. And then these are going to be followers that are going to help hold the cord in place. And it's just pretty much the same setup as the carriage, except I'm using a piece of plywood. Yeah, I'm really happy with this. So I put these metal plates on here because I was thinking that to be able to use them later for accessories, magnets for notes, I think they're going to be really handy. And cheap box fan. I've got a little mounting block mounted to the bottom of it. So if I ever need to, if this fan dies and I need to swap it out for a different one, it'll be pretty straightforward. You can see the little extra mounting plate I had to put on the timer switch below here to space it out a little bit. Now the timer switch is only going to control these outlets up high. The other outlets are going to be on anytime the fan is plugged in. So I wanted to be able to just hit the switch and walk away if I needed to clear out the shop or use it for drying parts or whatever. I've never felt like I had too many outlets. And shameless logo application, because I put my logo on everything. Cheap furnace filter goes in the back. That comes out pretty easy if I want to switch it over to fan mode. this was a fun one to build, so thank you for watching. If you guys have any thoughts, let me know.